Welcome once again to Cinemaholics, the major motion podcast, where we talk about the biggest and the best films coming to theaters and streaming online. From the San Francisco Bay Area, I'm John Negroni, film editor for theyoungfolks.com. And from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, he's a news and entertainment writer at Collider. It's Will Ashton. Will, say hello. You got to look up from all those comics you're drawing right now.
Hello.
I know, you always got your eyes on the funnies.
I guess so.
This week, we are talking about an A24 movie called Funny Pages, the feature directorial debut of Owen Kline. But there was a whole thing about this,
yes.
right? Will, are you ready for your victory lap?
I guess so, yeah. So, you and me were not really sure what to do this week. There was no major release, I guess, that came out, depending on how you feel about the Spider-Man No Way Home re-release or the Jaws re-release. Or
for that, the Spider-Man thing, it was like, they call it the more stuff cut or whatever. I don't remember, but like awesome they basically cut. They just made a longer version, added more scenes, and they were like, give us money again, please.
Yeah, I mean, they saw an opportunity. It's a holiday weekend. There was for whatever reason, there was no big release this weekend, so it made sense. They wanted to put it out. But yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know what ended up being the number one movie in America this past weekend. I heard it was neck and neck between that and Top Gun Maverick, but I'm not sure.
I thought it was Top Gun Maverick. But let me look at it right now, because I definitely don't think it was Funny Pages, right? I think that's probably the case.
So, I mean, what you're getting at is basically the big release, I guess, as it were, of this holiday weekend was...
Oh, it was Spider-Man.
Okay, I figured it was Spider-Man, but I knew it did Top Gun being number 2. Yeah.
Okay. So Spider-Man No Way Home collected $6 million. Wow. $6 million after a year being out. And then Top Gun Maverick made 5.5, which to me is more impressive considering, it's still at the top of the charts. It opened Memorial Day weekend in the summer. Like, how amazing is that?
Yeah, I mean, that's way more impressive considering, like, they didn't add anything. It was just that people still wanted to see the movie.
Right. It's also like Spider-Man, or I guess unlike this version of Spider-Man, this is the same movie. It's available right now on demand. Right. Top Gun Maverick, and people were still like, yeah, but, I can't, I want to watch it I demand to watch it on the big screen still. Yeah, I mean,
it's a very sort of patriotic film. People wanted to celebrate the holiday, Labor Day, as it were, by seeing Tom Cruise do his thing once again.
So we did a poll on the Twitter, because we had a few options, right? We talked about maybe we'll do a fall movie preview. Maybe we'll talk about, you wanted to talk about Funny Pages, the A24 thing. You're hearing good stuff. I thought about doing Rings of Power. I mean, I initially pitched House of the Dragon, but you were like, no, that you don't want to do the Game of Thrones thing.
Sure.
You're very anti that franchise, which I get it. Sure.
I mean, I just don't really care. I don't really like fantasy stuff in general. To be honest, I know that's your bag. I'm not trying to disparage it. It's one of our personal things.
Yeah, it's one of our sharpest divides,
Yeah. But anyway, so what I was going to say before is that was the only real major release of the weekend, I'll say.
I would not call it a major release.
What, the Rings of Power?
Funny. Oh, I thought you were talking about Funny Pages.
No.
Yeah.
This Funny Pages actually came out a couple weeks ago. It just never really got... It got a very quiet theatrical release, and it came out on demand. And it's been kind of a sleeper.
Yeah, the reviews dropped like August 24th or something like that.
Yeah, and it went to Cannes, I think back in May, and it didn't really get a wide response, I don't think. It was kind of one of those things where, people who saw it liked it, wasn't really getting a lot of buzz. It's becoming, if anything, a sleeper kind of film where, the people who it's made for, I guess, are kind of finding it gradually, I guess. But, it is an A24 film. It has a built-in audience that way as well. So
yeah, it's a basement VHS tape kind of movie. And more
underground film, as it were. But anyway, so I just wanted something as a substitute because, I just figured Rings of Power was going to win. I didn't think we had any other option, but I wanted to have a little bit of a fight. I thought it would be a little bit more interesting if we had.
You wanted to make it a contest,
I guess it. So Rings of Power, which I figured would win, was your pick.
Rings of Power, we should say, is the Lord of the Rings prequel series that just debuted on Amazon. So the first 2 episodes dropped on, I want to say, Friday. So that was the big pop culture thing, right?
Yeah. But anyway, so I mean, I wasn't really against seeing the show as it were. I guess it's not because of the fantasy thing, really. It was just because I feel it's a slippery slope to keep talking about TV shows. Like, I get, you want to talk about Stranger Things, that's an event. I get it. I'd never watched that show outside of a few episodes of season 1, but you had a lot of thoughts about it. It made sense. There wasn't anything else besides Minions that holiday weekend to really talk about. So we kind of did our own things there. And then the rehearsal was one of those things where you were on your honeymoon. Another weekend when there wasn't really much coming out besides, I think, like Emily the Criminal and Fall. So
yeah, August was a dead zone, right? I mean, the only major release that came out was Bullet Train, I want to say. Bullet Train and a DC League of Super Pets, I guess. Or was that like last week of July?
I think that was the last weekend of July.
Okay. But yeah, I mean, still, like, basically nothing over the last month. I mean, 3,000 Years of Longing, but like they barely pushed it. Orphan First Kill, which, again, that was while I was out. So like we missed talking about that one. I kind of want to see it, to be totally honest with you. And then there was Bodies. I forgot about that one.
Yeah. I do know. I mean, I like to think Beast was of some note, but I don't think the box office suggested as much. But
sure. And then Prey just went straight to Hulu. So it was like, I feel like Prey would have been like a big, not big, but it could have raked in some cash.
Oh,
I think that was a big miss.
Yeah, I mean, clearly Disney wanted to, or they weren't as confident in that film for whatever reason, and rather than premiering it on HBO Max, they just decided, we're going to try to get as much attention to our service, Hulu, as possible. So they put it on there, and for better or for worse, that's what happened. But in any case, so Rings of Power was your choice. I wanted a dog in the fight, so I opted for Funny Pages because I was genuinely kind of curious about it. I was hearing some good things about the film, as you mentioned. I wanted to see it for myself. I also wanted to be a little bit kinder to A24 because I feel like the last few reviews we've done, I've been, maybe a little bit more negative. I wasn't really crazy about Men, for instance. Buys lets me a little bit disappointed, and I know I was a little bit less enthused with Marcel the Show with Shoes On compared to you, though I still like that film. I just wasn't quite on your level and some other folks' level. So I saw a film like Funny Pages, which looked up my alley. I was like, if I had a choice, that would be my pick. But and then as you mentioned, Fall Movie Preview was kind of the median thing, was like, everyone's happy and unhappy if we all do the Fall Movie Preview, and then Wild Card was the other option that you included. So that was our poll, and to my surprise, my honest surprise, Funny Pages won.
It did, and I mean, I totally disagree that A24 has been, like, I feel like A24 has had a kick-ass year. Like, I genuinely, when you say that, I'm just like, no, I can't come to that same page with you. I think this is a much stronger year, for example, than last year in some respects. Well, I mean, unless you count Minari as a 21 film, but still.
What came out last year if we're comparing the two?
Last year was really good. Don't get me wrong. It had Red Rocket, my favorite movie of the year.
Right.
And it had, I thought The Green Knight was terrific. And Minari had its bigger release, even though I count that more as a 2020 film. But yeah, I mean, other than that, I mean, there was The Humans, which I never got to.
I like that one.
Come on, which I thought was solid. Souvenir Part 2, which I thought was okay, better than the first one. And then
I like that.
Lamb, Zola, False Positive. I mean, movies that, like, I didn't see Lamb, but movies that I'm just like, okay, sure. But I don't know. I think this year I've been much more like Everything Everywhere All at Once was like an event.
I agree. Yeah, that's the big hit. Yeah.
After Yang was, I think superb. Sure. I don't know. I just feel like the highs have been higher with this year, particularly with Marcel the Shell Shoes On. I think the only big miss was like Men. I think, like, with you, I just thought that was just a big old nah. And then I thought X was really good.
Yeah, I always thought X was fine. I think for me, it's mostly just been the summer stuff. Like, I would agree with you about Everything Everywhere All at Once. Obviously, it's their big hit. I think with a reason, that's probably in my top 5 still for favorite films of the year, even though that film has kind of gotten, the discourse around that film has been a bit much. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I guess our big disagreement would just be Bodies, and I guess to a lesser extent, Marcel the Show. I think they've had a fine year. I certainly think it's lesser than last year. I hear that list of films. I'm like, definitely, I prefer what they did last year over this year. But
we still have a bunch of films coming up, right? We have The Whale, for coming up for award season. Pearl comes out in a couple weeks. You know, there's a bunch of stuff too that I know is on the radar, but I don't know much about the films themselves.
Yeah.
Except for Claire Denis' next film, which I'm sure I'm going to devour. So yeah.
I mean, I'm just talking, generally speaking, I think this summer for A24 has been a little bit of a decline. But that's
fair enough.
Only based on the 3 titles, or the 2 titles, really, because I like Marcella's show. I feel like I'm coming out more negative than you want me to seem. But, I mean, I just think it was those 2 films, really. It was just Men and Buys just left me a little disappointed. That was making me wonder, like, is A24 becoming maybe a little bit of a parody of itself at this point with those 2 films?
Oh, I think that is true. I mean, I would say so with this movie, Funny Pages, which is kind of like taking the mid 90s thing and applying it to the early. I think this is an early 2000s film. Do you think it's late 90s, early 2000s? Not to jump into it.
You mean like what time it takes place in?
Yeah. I mean, the aesthetic is very late 90s to me, like 99, 98. But I would guess this movie is supposed to be like, it's American Splendor, right? 2003, 2002.
I think it's deliberately vague, but yeah, I took it as like probably early to mid 2000s, probably around like the same time like Squid and the Whale came out.
Right. That's Owen Kline was in that, right? So this is directed by Owen Kline, the son of Kevin Kline and Phoebe Cates, of course. Phoebe Cates being the Fast Times at Ridgemont High. The iconic scene in that movie she's in.
Sure.
And then,
she's also in Gremlins. You don't have to denigrate her to just one scene in a very famous film.
It's a pretty iconic role, so
sure. I just don't want to make it seem like we're just focusing on like the one moment in her filmography where she gets highly sexualized. It seems a little weird for this kind of conversation, but she was in Gremlins. She was in what else is she in?
I would assume that's a thing that people like recognize.
Sure, yeah, that's her most
readily,
famous role. I get it.
I'm just saying. But you're right that Phoebe Cates has been in plenty of other things like I think Paradise Island.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I just saying, like, if for a reason Owen Kline was listening to this conversation, I think it would be a little weird if that was the scene we're focusing on with his mom.
Okay. Well, she was in the second Gremlins, wasn't she?
She might be.
I think she was.
I've never actually seen the new batch. It's one of my bigger blind spots.
That's pretty interesting to me because I feel like you would probably like it more than the first Gremlins.
Oh,
I would wager a guess. So
I mean, I like the first Gremlins a lot. I don't know why I haven't seen it.
Yeah, me neither. Okay, well, so they have a kid, Owen Kline, and Owen Kline's been in some stuff. He's made a few short films, and we mentioned he was in Squid and the Whale. I think he was in a Safdie's movie, one of their early ones too. But
was he in Daddy Longlegs?
I don't know. I don't think that's the one, but I think it was. I'd have to look it up. But he wrote and directed this movie, Funny Pages.
Yeah,
his debut film, and very much like I mentioned before, it kind of is like American Splendor, but like it's a different take on it. But it's kind of going for the same thing, cartoonist in like an urban setting,
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit. It's like American Splendor by way of like Ghost World.
Ghost World, yeah. It's kind of like because it's kind of analyzing like to me, like I watched this movie and I'm like, before the Marvel stuff, before everything went before superhero movies became mainstream, before comic book culture became like the driving sort of pop culture tastemaker influence in like at least like the cinematic and streaming world, there were people who were extremely nerdy about this stuff, and they were far more sort of like in their own bubble with this stuff. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, a little bit more niche, you could say.
More niche, and there were people. This movie is all about like the people that you pass by on the street and you pretend that you try not to make eye contact, right? Like that's kind of where this movie is at, and it kind of has a sort of adults are super weird. Kids are super weird. Everybody's super weird and innately mean, basically. And you just kind of like come along this like slice of life adventure with this really dumb kid. And I think because he's a horrible human being, but that's the point, obviously. And I think so. I think some people would probably look at this and be like, this is coming of age. I think this is anti-coming of age, in a good way. I think it's trying to be in a sense, but it stars what's this kid's name? Daniel Zolghadri. He was in 8th grade. He was the creepy kid in 8th grade who like drives her home like after the mall hangout, right? Yeah, pretty gross, dude. In that, in this movie, he is a cartoonist or comic book artist. He works at a comic book store, and he kind of witnesses something like very traumatic in the beginning of this film. Twice, 2 very traumatic things happen to him, and then he basically tells his parents like he's going to go strike it out on his own, even though he's only 17. And you know, he basically like leaves his suburban, you know, middle class life in New Jersey and goes into Trenton, like the more urban area, tries to like live on his own, moves into like a creepy apartment. Super weird stuff starts happening to him, and he's just kind of like trying to desperately get to the next level of his life, like shortcut his way to the next level of his life, in a very arrogant fashion. He's a very unlikable protagonist, but he's definitely a protagonist I liked watching, if that makes sense. I gotta say though, I love what this movie's doing. I don't love this movie. I just don't. I had a hard time watching it. It's not the gross stuff. There's a lot of gross stuff in this movie. That stuff is like when I would like perk up a little bit and be like, all right, now we're doing something. I just feel like this is a really good aesthetic and it has a very good message, but it's in a story that to me feels anemic. Like, I really just think that this movie just doesn't move in a sort of like stuff happens in this, but it's all very incidental. I just didn't find myself really gripped by it. But where are you at with funny pages?
Certainly more positive, I would say. I was actually pretty impressed by how, I guess, self-aware Kline is about this film. I mean, I'm not going to assume it's autobiographical because I don't know if it is or not, but it seems like it's type of film where he knows the sort of pressure that I think people will put on like this, like, oh, you know, he's kind of, you know, quote unquote nepotism baby, getting to like make his first film and all this stuff, and he's trying to copy Terry Zwigoff and you know, his influence with Noah Baumbach, and you know, obviously the Safdie brothers are producers on the film, and they certainly lend their aesthetic to the film, and I think he's certainly a pupil of their work, and so you can see a lot of the influences here. But the story, as we mentioned, is about a guy who thinks he can kind of just meet them at their level just because he had this sort of life where he's trying to get, you know, he's obviously privileged, but he's trying to kind of go into this underground aesthetic, kind of, you know, tourist his way into poverty a little bit.
That's the autobiographical part of it, right? That you can imagine Owen Kline sort of like probably going through this exercise himself.
Well, I mean, I don't know if he did or not, but I imagine he kind of had maybe sort of a similar wake-up call, not to the extreme that happens in this film, but he maybe had a kind of similar idea where he like went through life kind of hoping that he could, you know, kind of have avenues open for him just if he humbles himself a little bit, and he had to have kind of like a cold slab of water kind of thrown on him at certain points. I don't know if that's true or not, but the movie itself, I really admired that he seems to take the right lessons from Terry Zwigoff and, you know, from Noah Baumbach, from the Safdies, and not only telling a story that has like their aesthetics, but seeming to understand why those movies work and why those movies are sort of uncompromising, why they're willing to take some risk, as it were. And I don't know, I thought it really it worked for me. I mean, I don't think it's able to be on their level per se in a sort of ironic fashion, but I think he takes the right lessons, and certainly for a debut, I think he is able to capture a lot of the sort of ickiness and weirdness and the idiosyncrasies of their works. And I guess there's a temptation here because he's obviously casting a lot of Zwigoff and Safdie Brothers regulars, the kind of off-kilter guys that look like people who would be in an R. Crumb comic or something like that. And there's something.
They look like people you would actually encounter in the real world. I think that's the Safdie Brothers formula.
I guess, but I like that they look very much like they're drawn, like they're characters who are coming to life in a very sort of cartoonish fashion. But there is that grounded aesthetic from the Safdies that makes it feel like there is something kind of realistic about this, even when it gets a little bit heightened towards the end or the second half. And I like that. Yeah, I mean, there's a temptation here, I guess, to almost sort of gawk at them and like not really have Zwigoff's like mix of like admiration, but also kind of weird, sort of put off by them. Like, certainly like a documentary like Crumb, he's fascinated by the subject, but he's also a little repelled because he's a weird, antisocial kind of guy, but he's interested. And I think there's a temptation here to not want to capture that same balance, because it can be a little bit more of like a gawking kind of thing. Like he's admiring them, but not really sympathizing with them. But I think because the protagonist, as you mentioned, is someone who innately doesn't really learn lessons until he learns them the hard way, I think his film becomes a more poignant commentary, because he has, this sort of hardcore wake-up call. He can only really capture it, I think, by making his character sort of repellent and making him,
I totally agree with that.
Yeah, I think sorry, go ahead.
No, that you're right. You're spot on, because like he has to be unlikable, because if he's likable, and because you are, especially as like a filmmaker in his shoes, Owen Kline, you have to get this message across in a hard way. It's a hard message to get across of like, there are a lot of people I bet watching this who are that character, who are this sort of like, they come from like the suburban sort of life or whatever. And they just want to sort of, humble themselves, right, in a very like inauthentic way, and get spat up by the real world. And that to me is like why he has to be like a hard character to watch. He has to do dumb things and be arrogant, because otherwise you're glorifying his quest, which I don't think is what Kline wants the audience to experience.
Right. And so I think that's a pretty admirable thing to do for a first film. Like, I don't think it's saying anything totally deep or profound, but his willingness to do this in a sort of uncompromising way suggests that he is taking the right lessons from these influences of his. And I don't know what he's going to do next. If he's going to do something very similar, if he's going to double down, if he's going to do something a little bit more conventional later on. But for a debut film, I find it to be very promising.
You don't know. He's directing Ant-Man 4 after this. That's a joke, but I could see the color like leave your face of like, that could be true.
I don't know. I mean, it's not unprecedented.
Exactly.
But, I mean, he certainly has a love of comics, as it were. And I mean, he tries to kind of, in an unorthodox way, get into superheroes in this film. So,
sure.
I guess it makes sense.
Yeah, I gotta say, like, again, it's not that I dislike the movie. I don't. Like, I do think that it's like, it's doing something kind of interesting. And the griminess is certainly something that I always appreciate. I did have a little bit, like we were talking about, like the parody of like an A24 film. I have a hard time. I think it's a little too washed out. Like, I think that it's an aesthetic that, like, it was shot on 16 millimeter, but it's like trying so hard to evoke the era that I think they went back a little bit too far. And so there were times when I just felt like it was a little inauthentic to me. It was trying so hard to be authentic that it kind of lost me a little bit on the immersion of the world, because it just constantly felt like I was watching an A24 movie with a grainy filter.
But see, I find that to be kind of fitting. Like, I don't know if that's intentional or not, or maybe that's me making excuses, but I feel like the fact that it tries a little too hard to catch that griminess, that it is like a little oversaturated, makes sense, because that's fitting for the character. Like,
But see, that's like a post hoc justification you can make. Whereas, like, while watching the movie, it's like a little distracting.
I don't know.
Yeah, you could read into it after the fact.
But that's what I was thinking about while I was watching the film. So I don't know if I necessarily agree.
Okay, yeah, I just wasn't then. Yeah.
See, because I know when the movie started, I was kind of like, this seems like a little like oversaturated, and I'm thinking about it, like, as a character is also like trying to like get himself into this place that's not super authentic, but he's trying to immerse himself in it. It made sense for me when we first saw the apartment, and like there's clearly a lot of tension put into like the griminess of it, but the look of it feels like it's like almost a little like too overthought, and it made sense. I don't know, like I said, maybe it's me making excuses, but I found
if you had that honest thought during the movie, I'm kind of surprised that your mind went there. I'm impressed, if anything else, because I guess for me it's like I'm watching it, and to me that's not the stuff I'm thinking about. I'm thinking more about like I just with this kid, and like in these dangerous situations, I'm just so fixated on what makes him tick. And on the one hand, I'm glad that the movie doesn't like go too far with trying to be a character study, and instead it's plotting. There's still stuff that happens. It's not like a bunch of monologues. It's not just this kid sitting around telling the audience what he thinks. There's a lot more showing here than telling, which I like. But I do also think that on the other side of the spectrum, I feel like there were maybe some just missing ingredients that I kind of wanted a little bit more of like I wanted to feel alongside this character. And I just don't think I got that. I don't think I felt anything that he felt, except for a couple of scenes where he feels absolute abject terror. I definitely felt that. There's a moment where he walks into a room and witnesses something, and he and I were standing there, jaws down, and he looked at me, the character, and he was like, "Can you believe what we're looking at, John?" And I was like, "I genuinely can't. I'm really shocked. Let's get out of here." So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I felt for me it was just that sort of uncomfortable unease allowed me to kind of guide into it. Was I mean, I guess it's not like totally about immersing yourself completely into his perspective, but I felt like the film is trying to be self-aware enough to like acknowledge like, yeah, this is a kind of crummy dude. You don't really want to like, you can see some of yourself in him maybe if you can relate to him in certain ways, but the filmmaker here, Kline, is like trying to kind of get that balance of getting us in his shoes, understanding him as a character, but also being removed enough to kind of acknowledge that like, yeah, he's in for a hard lesson, and you just kind of have to watch what's going to happen. I felt that's a tricky balance that he pulled off pretty well, but if we disagree, that's fine. I understand.
Well, a couple things. I mean, I really liked when they were in the comic book shop. And the scene with like I felt really bad for Miles in all
Miles,
facets.
Man.
Yeah. Holy. And there's a character who like I forget the character's name, but he sort of is evaluating Miles' comic at one point, and his like commentary on that.
Andy Milonakis character.
Is that who it was? Okay, yeah, because
the guy at the comic shop.
Not the guy who ran the store.
No. Andy Milonakis is the guy that like scolds Miles, the comic.
Yes, okay, yeah, for the Bean World thing.
Yeah.
I wanted the movie to sort of like just kind of veer off with that character for a little bit. Like let's get his B plot, because I was very fascinated by his acting, and like it sounds like you've seen him in other things. I haven't, so I mean,
did you not know about the Andy Milonakis show?
No, I never saw it. What is it?
Wow, I mean that's surprising. I mean, I'm not like a fan per se. Like I'm not as familiar with his work, but I'm definitely aware of him. I was surprised when he showed up in this. I was like, wait a minute, is that Andy Milonakis?
you can keep putting me on blast if you want.
Yeah.
I just looked it up. It looks like he was also in Waiting. I don't remember him.
Oh yeah, he was in like he's in Waiting. He's like in the like dishwasher crew and stuff.
Okay.
He hasn't really been much. He was like a child star of like the 90s. He had like his own, I think it was like MTV show, and he was like kind of like, a little bit of like a rebel rouser, and then he got older and he, kind of stopped being in as many things for whatever reason. But yeah, it was really surprising to see him in this.
If his show was MTV, that's why, because I didn't really watch MTV at all, like growing up. So
neither did I, but I was familiar with Andy Milonakis. Like, I mean, yeah, no, I mean, if you ever like went to FYE, like the every season of that DVD, you could just see him. I was very familiar.
See, when I went to FYE, I wasn't in the DVD section. Well, I was over by CD? Like those like posters in the back.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Like, and I would always like look through my friends, and we would talk about the, like we would go over and be like, okay, but did John Lennon actually, or did Paul McCartney die? And we'd look at the poster of Abbey Road. Like that's where I was at.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. Each your own. I didn't really have like FYEs close to me, so anytime I just went there, it would have to be like a trek for me.
We had one in our mall. You didn't have? Did you have a mall in Bethel?
Yeah. I mean, there was one. It was at a mall, but it wasn't like the mall nearest to me. Unless I'm misremembering. It's been a little bit since. I don't even know if are FYEs still around anymore. I don't think they are.
There might be a few kicking. Because they kind of like transitioned to being kind of like Spencer's Gifts a little bit.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, whatever.
But back to this movie, I think that anyway. I do applaud the restraint on Owen Kline's, not to have like a call to 8th grade for Daniel Zolghadri and have him like be in a mall at one point. So there's that. I do want to say like they're also like, to me, the best parts of this movie is like, I think the opening like 10 minutes is really good. Like I was definitely like hooked, because I was just like, this is a movie that I think is going to be like really impacting. And I think it's like, I tweeted today, I was like, oh man, is this what it was like to work for like Nickelodeon and like Dan Schneider, in like the early 2000s? I know. But like considering Jeanette McCurdy's memoir that she just came out with, kind of putting them on blast for like her experience with iCarly. And, I think like there's definitely a story there to tell. And I was kind of getting a little bit of that from this movie incidentally. My thing with this is that I really love the first 10 minutes, but then aside from like a couple scenes later, I don't know. I just think the movie kind of flattens for me. I just don't think that I don't think the rising action is there. I just felt like things just kept happening and we were kind of all over the map. I think it's on purpose. I think Owen Kline is trying to do something a little bit more true to life. He's trying to sort of like do a little bit more of a slow burn, even though it's a short movie. I guess though, it just like, it doesn't have like the ingredients of a very effective film, at least for me, but I can certainly appreciate it. It's just it's like eating a meal that like breaks certain rules, and you're just like, man, it's cool that you broke some rules, but this is still like paprika on ice cream. So I'm kind of sort of, I have I guess like a limit on how much I can appreciate.
I guess for me, I just appreciate that the movie is aware enough that like, yeah, like if a guy like this happens to exist, he's not going to have like that, like, like these high marks of like a life that's going to like, and this happens. It's going to be a little bit more incidental, and he's going to assume like greater things are to come. And obviously that's not the case. So it felt, like you said, like a little bit more realistic to me, that it had like kind of a slodgy sort of like pacing in that respect, I guess. But yeah, I don't know. I felt to me like that was something that was a little bit more endearing about the film, is that it wasn't as beholden to like a structure like that, like a 3-act structure. Like it felt a little bit more willing to let the characters feel a little bit more lived in and present. To me, that made it more of a, maybe not realistic, but feel a little bit more authentic, I guess, like you were saying. So yeah, I don't know. I find that to be a pretty admirable thing that he pulled off here.
I'm surprised it's a Cannes movie, because this feels so much like a Sundance picture to me, like this feels like something I would have watched, in Park City with like a whole bunch of people, not, by myself, on TV at home. It does feel like like a festival movie that's probably best appreciated with a group, but not the case for a lot of people, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously, like I said, it's going to be a fairly niche film. I also feel it's the type of film for people like us who like see a lot of coming of age movies like this, that the fact that it's acknowledging kind of the tropes and subverting them in sort of biting ways and sort of aesthetic ways, like it feels to me like a film for the type of crowds who see like a billion of these coming of age movies, and the fact that harshly sort of subverts the expectations and the tropes is very rewarding for us. But like for a wide audience, it's understandable that even A24, a studio that likes to make fairly minor indie films, have like a major platform where like, yeah, this is maybe more of a small limited theatrical release and on demand same day sort of deal. Like they acknowledge that the crowd that this is for might be a little bit smaller than something like Bodies, but same time,
more of like it's like a street cred kind of movie, isn't it?
Yeah, like like something you kind of find in the back shelf of the comic store, as it were. But yeah, for me, like when we were talking about Bodies, like not a film I hate per se, but a film I guess I'm a little bit more critical of than you, because it feels like that's trying to be satirical of a sort of generation that, oblivious characters, not like this, but of a similar vein, I guess, like characters who aren't self-aware and kind of learn the hard way some harsh lessons. And I felt for me that movie didn't quite stick the landing, that the jokes weren't quite as biting as in that respect. And I feel like this movie feels like a kind of night and day comparison in that respect. Like this movie is a lot more willing to be in the thick of it, be a lot harsher and a lot meaner than that film was. And I can respect if you disagree with that, but it felt more refreshing to see a film like this after having a kind of more muted response to Bodies.
Well, I mean, despite my criticisms, I have been thinking about writing about this movie, and if I published a Rotten Tomatoes, it would be fresh. Certainly, like I would not look at this movie and just be like blah splat. But at the same time, to what you're saying, I don't think it's for everybody, and I'm glad it isn't. I don't think every movie should be for everybody. So in this case, I definitely, there's more to like here than I think dislike. It's just that I think that there are some caveats with this movie that I would warn some of our, listeners who I know a ton of Cinemaholics listeners will get something out of this. Clearly they voted for the movie, they wanted us to talk about it. So I would just be like, hey, go into it with an open mind, but certainly a guarded one, because it might rub you the wrong way in some respects. It's cringe comedy for sure. But sure. I know for a lot of people, I feel like more of the listeners than not will appreciate it for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, I don't know how wide, like I said, the audience is for it, but I imagine it's going to be maybe a little bit wider than A24 maybe anticipated. Yeah. It does feel like it would be a fun double feature or something like Under the Silver Lake, which kind of tackles some similar things in a sort of different way. But yeah, I mean, it's not as good as that film, I think, but I think it would be a fun double feature to be sure.
Yeah, I guess I invoke our listeners because I know our listeners tell us, they want to feel something with movies. They want original stuff. And this is absolutely an original movie. But of course, mileage will vary. All right, let's play the Rotten Tomatoes game. Will, we got 73 reviews counted and we have fewer than 50 audience score ratings. So might be a tough one to predict, but I'm curious where you're going to land. What do you think the Rotten Tomatoes score is for Funny Pages?
I feel like critics are generally going to be on its side. Maybe not overwhelmingly so, but they're going to recognize the craft, recognize what it's doing, at least appreciate it like you were. I'm going to say 82%.
A little close. It's a 77. So you were off by 5, a little bit lower. And it's funny because I was looking at the people who were negative, and it's not a lot of critics that I keep up with. In fact, one of the critics who gave it a fresh was Armand White from National Review. I was kind of surprised to see that.
That actually makes sense. I feel like, I don't know. I feel like he's someone who's like, if you're going to do something, double down and do it. And this is a film that does that. So it's like, that makes sense.
Fair enough. All right. But what about the audience score? Like I said, fewer than 50 ratings. What do you think?
This is where it gets tricky. Cause I don't know, the type of people who go on to Rotten Tomatoes and give either positive or negative reviews. I don't know if they're going to respond to this film or quite appreciate it. But I feel like, it's an A24 crowd. I think they're going to know somewhat what they're going to get with this. So I'm going to say, 71%. Unfortunately,
it's much lower. It's 41%.
All right, I should have guessed. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I probably would have guessed along the same lines as you, though, just considering the limited aspect of it. I feel like people going to an art house theater to watch this kind of want a movie like this, I would assume, but I guess not. All right, and that's Funny Pages. It's available in select theaters right now. If you like Safdie Brothers movies, they did produce this, and it certainly is of a kind with good time. And like we said already, Squid and the Whale and American Splendor, Ghost World. It certainly has like a type, and so it's available for you all. We could do Letterboxd too. I don't see a cinema score for it. Okay. But for Letterboxd, we have 7.1 thousand watches, much higher than I would have guessed. Actually, what do you think the average rating is from 0 to 5? On Letterboxd?
I feel like I guessed this rating a lot, but 3.4.
Oh, so close. 3.5. You're just 0.1 off. Very good stuff. All right.
I would agree with all that. I would say definitely if you like Daniel Klaus and Terry Ziegloff as well, I think it's very much up their alley. It's been a long time since we've gotten a Terry Ziegloff film, and I feel like this is maybe as close we'll get in the next few years. And if that's the case, I'm certainly very appreciative of that.
All right. That is Funny Pages. Next week, I think we have like 2 films that are up for contention. Now, we didn't talk about Honk for Jesus Save Your Soul. Forgot to mention that at the top of the show. That did come out on Peacock this past weekend. And the reason we didn't talk about it is we already talked about it on an early episode of the show because we both watched it for Sundance. But I still recommend that movie. I know you didn't like it as much, Will, but that's Focus Features joint. And I liked it a good bit, but you guys can check that out if you're interested.
Yeah.
And this coming weekend, there are a couple things coming out. The 2 big ones are Pinocchio and Barbarian. Yeah. And I would like to talk about both of them. I'm planning to see Barbarian. I have a screening this week. I should be making it. I was supposed to watch Pinocchio. I got the screener, but I didn't have time to watch Pinocchio, so I'll be watching it on Thursday with everybody else. Pinocchio is it's like the live action remake, directed by Robert Zemeckis, not the Guillermo del Toro one.
Yeah.
This is the one with Tom Hanks and Joseph Gordon-Levitt. Yeah.
Yeah, it's their reunion, right? Is this the first movie that Zemeckis has directed with Tom Hanks since Castaway?
I wonder. Yeah, that might be the case. And didn't Zemeckis also do that one with Joseph Gordon-Levitt, the Walk? Was that him?
Yeah, that was him.
Yeah. So yeah, kind of a fun. I don't think I've ever seen Hanks and Levitt in a film together. Keegan-Michael Key is also in it too. Cynthia Erivo and Luke Evans. But yeah, I think this Pinocchio movie, I hope it freaks me out. I hope it's a horror movie, but I know it won't be.
I mean, I know one friend of the pod who has seen it, and they had some very interesting things to say about it. I don't know if the embargo is broken, so I won't.
Not quite. Yeah, I'm a little nervous because the embargo, I think, is not until like the day it comes out. So either the day it comes out or the day before. So right before. So that might be a bad sign. We'll have to see. But I don't know. But I do want to see Barbarian a lot, though. Bill Skarsgård, Justin Long, Regina Campbell. I think that could be a fun horror watch. We haven't talked about a real like full-on horror movie in a little bit. Yeah. But do you plan on seeing that?
Oh, yeah. No, I'm definitely curious. Yeah, I've been hearing, as I think I mentioned in the previous Cinemaholics episode, that this might be this year's Malignant, which certainly piques my interest.
Right. Same here.
Yeah, I mean, it's Zach Kreger, I believe is his name. It's like one half of the Whitest Kids You Know.
That's right. That's right. Unfortunately, the other Whitest Kid You Know, Trevor, passed.
Trevor Moore?
Yeah.
Trevor Moore, I believe. Yeah. Trevor Moore?
Yeah, Trevor Moore. I think you're right. Because the other guy is Sam Brown. Trevor Moore passed, I think, was that last year?
I believe so,
2 years ago.
It was like an accident.
Tragic.
Yeah.
But, this is Zach Kreger's. He's done a bunch of TV stuff, and I know he's done short films. I don't know if he's ever directed a full-length film on his own, because I know he did Miss March, but I think he co-directed that.
Right, he co-directed that with the late Trevor Moore. So,
and that was ages ago. Did you watch Miss March?
I did. Yeah, I wasn't crazy about it. I mean, I felt it didn't quite have the same spark as their better Whitest Kids You Know skits, but
we might have to go on a Whitest Kids You Know like binge or something. It's been a long time since I watched some of those skits on YouTube.
I mean, there's certainly some that I think hold up pretty well.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. For the time being, we'll be back next week, and we'll be talking about one or both of those movies coming up on the show. But until then, definitely connect with us on social media. We have our Twitter and everything. Hit us up if you have any comments on the show. You can also email us. cinemaholics@gmail.com is how you do that. We also have a Patreon, website, all that good stuff. You know the deal. For now, though, Will, I guess I'll see you on the next one. For Unit California, I'm John Negroni.
And for Unit Pennsylvania, I'm Washington.
See you next time.